Namaskar, this is Sai Sudhir from Mahatma Gandhi National Council of Rural Education. Welcome to the video lecture series on rural supply chain management. In the last video, we discussed on the scenario of supply chain management practices in the rural areas as well as various career opportunities that we have in this supply chain area. In this video, we are going to discuss on various impact, whether it is a positive impact or negative impact on supply chain management practices by GST. So, what is the impact of GST on supply chain management? So, let us go into that. In this video, we would like to cover what is GST and what is its impact on supply chain management. So, whether it is having a positive impact or negative impact, that we are going to discuss. As you are aware, GST is an indirect tax that is used in our country on the supply of goods and services. So, we have different type of taxes. Mostly we have two types, direct tax and indirect tax. So, GST is a kind of indirect tax which is used to rate or used to impact on the goods and services, on the supply of goods and services. This came into effect on 1st July 2017, whereas this is essential to improve the transparency of business transactions, to enhance the reliability and to see that the timelines of supply chain mechanism flow in a right way and in easy way. A better supply chain mechanism would ensure a reduction in the wastage of cost, that is maybe for the farmers, retailers, customers, anyone. As we discussed various entities involved in the supply chain process. So, we want to see that whether this tax impact or the implementation of this GST is providing a way for the entities in the supply chain to smoothen the operations in the supply chain process. GST is having a far reaching impact in any kind of business organization. It will not only alter the way of taxation of the goods and services, but this concept, this also creates an impact on intrastate or interstate supplies in terms of the method of taxation, in terms of the system of elements of this credit based payment and filing the returns. Every area of business look into this, and this will help any kind of business organization to see that the flow of processes happens in an easy way, and it helps the customers as well as the suppliers, every component involved in this area, to utilize this taxation in a better way. Supply chain basically involves various activities, as we discussed, starting from sourcing to the way of providing product to the customer. So, it involves procurement of raw material, storage of raw material, processing that into finished product by the manufacturer. From there, transit the finished product to the distributor or a dealer, and from there we are transiting that from distributor or dealer to the retailer, from there to the customer. Each flow needs different checks, different assessments. So, all this, the time that is there, the lapse that is happening in terms of reaching the product to the customer, from the order placement to the order fulfillment. So, whatever the time that is taking there in this process, so we are trying to reduce that. So, how taxation plays a vital role in the reduction of time, as we are discussing about different wastes, how to handle these wastes, and while handling these wastes, how tax is going to, this GST is going to play a vital role. So, this kind of sometimes the transaction happens not only within a state. So, we have transactions that happens between different states and sometimes between different countries. So, whenever we are importing and exporting also, when we are handling with different charges, when we are handling with different documentation procedures. So, to reduce the process of this between the intrastate or the interstate mechanism, this GST is going to play a vital role. So, whenever we are discussing about tax, so we have an assessment that while fixing the cost of a product or the price for a product, The total cost includes all aspects such as production costs in terms of the cost that incurred for distribution, the cost that incurred for holding the inventory or for holding the stock, and even for the way of distribution, advertisement, all kind of expenditure is involved. At the same time, the taxation, the tax that is even levied by the government, whether it is the state government or central government. So now we have a kind of tax system where the both state and central government is involved. So how much amount it is incurred? So including that amount of tax into the price of a product. So the burden that we are discussing, the tax burden that we are levying out, or we are making it on the customers. How customers are satisfied with this, or what type of mechanisms the companies are adopting, and how the companies are handling this kind of expenditure, how they are managing this, whether it is going to help the supplier or help the manufacturer or not. So what type of help it is going to provide. So these aspects we will also discuss. There are basically 4 bills related to the GST is implemented in our country. In India, the idea of adopting GST was first suggested by Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. In his government during 2000, it came into existence. After several rounds of discussions by various committees, the Honorable President of India gave consent for this constitution of the amendment bill to become an act. In the year 2017, 4 bills related to the GST that came into existence. So it started in the term of Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji and came into existence in 2017. And it has 4 bills, which includes the Central GST Bill, Integrated GST Bill, Union Territory GST Bill, and the GST, which is a compensation for states bill. The GST Council also finalized the GST rates and rules, and the government declares that the GST bill will be applicable from 1st July 2017 except Jammu and Kashmir state. But later on, GST was implemented in Jammu and Kashmir also. And in order to address these issues in the taxation, the Constitution came out with the 122nd Amendment Bill, which was put forth in Lok Sabha on 19th December 2014, and in September 2016, a Goods and Service Tax Council was created by the Union Finance Minister, by the then Union Finance Minister, and the Revenue Minister and Ministers of the state to take decisions on the GST rates. So they are in a discussion that time. So when we are coming out with a kind of tax regime, we cannot come out with a single tax regime on all products. How to prioritize the products? On what basis we have to prioritize the products? And what slabs we can come out with that? Which slabs will help the products or the customers, suppliers, everyone, the entire entities in the supply chain. As we are connecting this topic with the supply chain management, the entities that are involved in the supply chain, whether it is a supplier, whether it is a manufacturer of the product, whether it is a distributor or a retailer, and the customer as a consumer. So every area of supply chain practices or the process should get the benefit out of this GST, of this taxation system. So how they can come out with a kind of taxation system that helps all these kind of players. In that context, they have discussed and they came out of various regimes or various kind of tax slabs under this GST, and the GST Council, which is a separate entity that will also oversee the implementation of this GST system. So they came out with a council, and that council is taking care of this initiatives, and the council came out with 4 different rates, that is 5% slab, 12% slab, 18% slab, and 28% slab. So we have 5 different tax regimes or tax slabs or tax rates under this GST Council, and some goods and services were classified as they are exempted from tax also. So some basic provisions, which are the basic amenities, the basic essentials, for such essentials of goods and services, they gave exemption as well. And above, for the luxury goods, the GST Council came out with a high rate of cess high rate of tax slab for the luxury goods. And the administrative control. So, who will regulate this? Who will alter this? Who will monitor these aspects? So, when talking about the administrative powers, the GST Council came out with the administrative control of over 90% of the taxpayers with turnover less than 1.5 crores, they would be under the state tax administration, whereas 10% of the control would be with the central tax administration. And the administration control over these taxpayers who are having turnover more than 1.5 crores, they would be equally divided between the state and central tax administration. And talking about the GST network, in the year 2013, the government came out with a goods and service tax network as a private company under section 25 of the Companies Act 1956. This GST network is expected to offer the front end services of registration, payment and returns to the taxpayers. So, the council is established to create a regime of tax for various products, various goods and services under the GST, and to administer the activities, whereas there is an existence of GSTN, Goods and Services Network, which is created as a private company in 2013 to see that the registration, payment and returns of the taxpayers that can be happened as a front end services. It also identified 34 IT and financial technology companies and tagged them as GST Suvidha providers. The government's initiative as GST Suvidha providers, about 34 IT and financial technology companies, and these organizations are helping the taxpayers when they interact with this GSTN through various applications. So, the connectivity they have established for the taxpayers, for the users under this area, and this helps them to connect and get the services regarding the registration process or in terms of payments or in terms of returns filed by the taxpayers. So, we have about 34 IT companies or technology companies under this GST Suvidha providers scheme or this area, and this basically also helps and connects with various customers and all different users through various applications. And when we are talking about the features of GST, so what are the main features of GST? It is based on the principle of value added tax, either the input tax method or the subtraction method, that has an emphasis on voluntary compliance and accounts based system. It is basically a comprehensive levy and collection of both goods and services at the same rate with the benefit of input tax credit or subtraction of value of the transaction value, and minimum number of floor rates of the tax, that is generally which is not exceeding 2 rates. There is no scope for levy of cess, resale tax, additional tax, special tax, turnover tax as well as octroi tax. There is also no scope for levy of multiple levies on the tax of goods and services such as sales tax, entry tax, entertainment tax, luxury tax. So, earlier when we purchase any product, we can see different type of charges, different type of cess rates. So, if a product price is some 50 rupees, so for 50 rupees product, whatever the charges that is there on that, sales tax, whatever the tax that is there. So, we used to have different type of tax, different type of cess rates applied on that particular product. And now, overcoming all those barriers, this came out with only one particular way where not exceeding 2 rates, this came into picture. And the taxing of capital goods and inputs, whether the goods and services are relatable to the manufacturers at a lower rate, so as to reduce the inventory carrying cost and the cost of production. And GST is also a destination based tax. It is a destination based tax which is levied at a single point of the time of consumption of goods or the services. and from whom? By the ultimate consumer. So it is a destination based. So this tax which we are collecting, which the government is collecting, it is from the consumer and at the time of consumption, not at the time of sale in that way, at the time of consumption. And a common law and procedure throughout the country which is there under a single administration. So at the point of sale, at the time of consumption, at the destination point, there this particular tax is basically implemented. And the GST has three prime models, as we are discussing about the model of GST. In this we have three different models. One is GST at the central level, the central government level, GST at the state government level, and GST at both central and state government level. And in India, GST model is dual in nature. So it is having both central as well as state GST component, which is levied on the same base. Whatever it is charged by the central government, the same is equally charged by the state government. So both gets equal share, and all the goods and services which are having few exemptions will be brought into the GST. We have two slabs, that is CGST and SGST. The central government the central government slab as well as the state government service tax. And when we talk about the implementation of GST in various countries, you can see there are different nations, how they are following various GST regimes and when it started in various nations. It started in France in the year 1954, followed by New Zealand in 1986, in Canada 1991, Singapore in 1994, followed by Australia, Malaysia, and in India in 2017. So the way of its implementation, how this is happening. So how the government has divided this product or the goods and services into various slabs, on what basis, on what parameters. If you look at the various thresholds of GST in India, according to the GST India sources, fruits, wheat, milk, rice, the basic products, the basic requirement, essentials, they have levied 0% of tax. Whatever the actual price is there, that is only the price. No tax is levied on these four categories. But on milk, processed like a kind of skimmed milk, and fertilizers, there is a 5% of tax levied. And if you take some products like ghee, butter oil, dairy products, we have 12%. Similarly, the equipments which are used in the agricultural processes, you may take like the water pumps or the milking machines or any essentials used in the agricultural processes, any equipment used in this agricultural process, 12% is charged. And for pesticides, 18%, and farm equipments, especially like tractors, such kind of equipments, 12% GST is included. And for the condensed milk, 18%, and dry fruits, paste, jam and juices, ranging from 12 to 18%. So there are different slabs enabled by this council, GST council, and according to the article 366(26)(a), it defines the services as something which is other than the commodities, and GST is basically levied on all goods and services. So GST is basically combining 17 distinct forms of the central indirect taxes. So earlier, before the implementation of this GST, we have about some 17 distinct forms of taxes like service tax, excise duty, we have luxury tax, some indirect taxes such as luxury tax, entry tax, VAT, octroi duty, sales tax. So consolidating all these kind of taxes and making it or bringing it into a single consolidated tax system, that is the basic objective of this council. And as we discussed earlier, in India we have 4 GST thresholds or the slab rates, which is 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. Under this GST law, we can see the GST dairy farming, poultry farming, stock breeding, or they are kept out of the definition of agriculture, because there will be a taxable value under the GST. So we have classified the farming and non-farming activities. So farming activities comes under this, non-farming activities comes under the other slab in that way. And if a product is having a base price of rupees 200, the rate of CGST and SGST, as we have discussed, two type of slabs that we have in the GST. One is CGST and SGST. The central government sales tax, which is about 8%, as well as the state government services tax is about 8%. So both are having the same rate. So on rupees 200 product, CGST is about 16 rupees, whereas SGST is also 16 rupees. And of course, when we are talking about agriculture, because as we are talking the rural supply chain perspectives, in the rural areas especially, we have agriculture as one of the key area for the contributing factor here. So fertilizers are very important in the agriculture area, but earlier the government has charged 6% on these taxes, and in the GST regime the tax has been on the fertilizers has been increased to 12%. The same input is on tractors as well. So waivers on the manufacture of tractors is removed. So tractors also being used as one of the important essential for agriculture in the rural areas. But the government has removed the taxation, the waiving off of taxation on the tractors, and the GST of 12% has been imposed. Of course, this is somehow beneficial, as now the manufacturers will be able to claim input tax credit. And earlier only 2% VAT was charged on milk and other certain milk products, but under the GST rate, the fresh milk, that is zero and skimmed milk, is levied with 5% GST, and the condensed milk is going to be taxed at the rate of 18%. And of course, tea is one of the most crucial items in the Indian household, as we all know that. The price of the tea also might be increased due to the tax rate 5% under the GST rate from the earlier VAT rate of 4 to 5% with the Assam and West Bengal, and with the exemption of 0.5 and 1% in these respective states. But when we talk about the benefits that we have on implementation of this GST, so how far it is beneficial to the country, there is a cascading effect of taxation which is mitigated under the implementation of GST. The uniformity came into picture, abolishing all the or coming out of all the 17 distinct rates, coming out with a single kind of tax mechanism, and the rate of taxes and production across the states can be also abolished. So we can maintain an uniformity across the country among different states. A unified tax system can be developed, and this enables a common national market that also boosts the foreign investment, and this also helps or boosts the manufacturing activities as well as exports, because we have this common system here, and this will also help in transit of goods from one point to the other point for the manufacturer's purpose, especially in the supply chain, movement of raw material or work in progress or finished components among the across the country. So that will help a lot, because there is no kind of taxation system among all these movement of transit, because the final tax is collected at the destination point at the time of consumption. So this will also help in generating more employment and also leads to the growth of the economy. And this is a simpler and unified taxation system. We can consider it as with small number of exceptions, and there are also automated and simplified methods for processing, such as registration, returns, or in terms of tax payments as well. And all these interactions are handled by the common GSTN website. As we told about, there are 34 IT and technological companies, almost they are working in this way under GST Suvidha scheme, and this will basically help in connecting with the users for registration process or the payment process, or in terms of assisting them during this entire process of filing and returns as well as payments and all. And we can also come out with an accurate and transparent system, as the electronic matching will be performed between these transactions and the during the input tax credit process as well. And now when we are focusing on the impact of GST on the rural supply chain, so what is the impact we have on this, whether we have a positive impact or negative impact because of this. So we have both pros and cons. We have both positives and negatives in every implementation, every scheme implementation, coming out of with different tax slabs and coming out with a unified system, especially for the rural products. There is some there are some benefits and also there are some disadvantages as well. Let's talk about those impact. So what is the positive impact of this and what is the negative impact of this? And mostly if you look at the positive concerns, there is an enhanced mechanism for the supply chain, where there is no levy on storage of farm products. So for this, the burden on the farmers have been lowered, and there is also provision for credit on input tax, like already for the tax that is already paid, each dealer which they have paid, the GST provides each dealer with an input tax credit. So that provides a trouble free supply chain, which will be created a kind of trouble free supply chain, and that will also enable the agri food to travel freely throughout the country. And the time that is taken during the transportation, it also gets reduced, because we need not look at various documents that are required when we are traveling from one state to the other state. So as this is a unified tax system, so we can transit across the country with a single way of mode of payment, mode of operations. And the exemption that is there on the tax, which is on the consumption of that is imposed on various consumption of various products, and this is only collected at the destination point. So this benefits the companies as well, and it also eases the intergovernmental trade. When we are moving from one place to the other place, this basically provides a support, and this is a basic plus point, this kind of liberalization of the agricultural commodity marketing, and this made it possible for the agricultural commodities also to operate smoothly. Of course, there are some negative aspects as well which we have to focus, the supply chain practices, especially in terms of fish, meat, poultry and milk products or dry fruit or jellies, such kind of products. The kind of previous tax rate, which is related to the 5%, the food sector work has got doubled, and GST is also responsible for leasing of warehouses by the storage and storage agency at the reverse cost of 18%. So these charges, where the most of the warehouses, their agribusiness warehouses are rented to the small property owners, so this is a bit difficult for them or a bit high for them. And the increased storage as well as cold storage building costs also get higher. These things were exempted earlier, but now the factory building, cold storages, such kind of warehouse based cost charges also included into this, and that is raised to 18% GST, especially for the farm products. So this is creating a kind of problem, and this has to be also addressed. Whereas when we talk about some modern facilities also which are required in the warehouse mechanisms and storage point of view, so when we are trying to inbuilt or when we are trying to impart some modern mechanisms to store the goods, or in terms of automation practices in the warehouse, such type of modern facilities also comes under this latest slab of now they are charged about 18% GST, and this will have an impact on the way of implementing modern practices in the agri infrastructure development. So this goes in a negative direction, because people think of like adopting the kind of latest practices or the modern practices in storing their products. And of course every system will have both pros and cons, but this is also coming out with such a kind of way. During the pre-GST, there were some schemes also floated by the central government or the state government for the development of the economy. So some schemes also helps from the government, and the buyer of goods and services also comes out with this, whereas under the GST Act, these schemes were not continued, some of the schemes were not continued, as well as distribution of goods and services will surely also have its share of impact on pricing. So the important point which we have to look at this is whatever the charges that are accumulated in this area, these are all adding price to the product. So it becomes, as we can see, whenever the tax slabs changes, so we can see the products that where prices are going high and the products where the prices are coming low. So we have to look at this in the entire process. We have to check with the process of identifying the prioritization of products or prioritizing the products. So which products comes under which slab, and how we are deciding that, how the GST Council is taking that or assessing that, and the way of mechanisms that we are implementing in this area through the GSTN, GST network. So how the taxers, these users are registering in this portal, and the services provided to them in terms of payment or in terms of the returns, filing returns and all. So we have to look at all these perspectives, and there is also a need, especially in the rural areas, to create more awareness on these practices. Maybe the higher education institutions, or maybe the practitioners, or the kind of organizations, NGOs, so they also can take a vital role in promoting or creating an awareness among the rural community, like maybe the supplier or the manufacturer or the kind of distributor or the retailers, anyone, and also the customers. So what practices will help them to reduce the cost and reduce this kind of pricing component, so that when we discussed about this impact, it also means the impact on the distribution of the vendors. So we have to look at this, and this basically focus on the way of handling that in a right way to promote the goods and services. Of course, we also need to focus on discount based mechanisms as well, and of course the introduction of GST has brought anyhow the shift in the way of business it is conducted these days, but the way of its implementation, the way of its integration among different players, it is creating some benefits. We have to take the advantage of those benefits, and we have to handle the way of negative impact and address that negative impact in a right way, so that it will not create more burden on the customers. Because in the supply chain, we are looking at how we can eliminate the waste during the supply chain process, and how we can provide customer value, the better value to the customer in terms of a product, and also within less cost. So when we are trying to reduce the cost, of course tax also plays a vital role. So whenever the tax slabs are changing sometimes, or whenever a product is entered into some other tax slab, automatically there is an impact on the price. So definitely there is a rise in the price of the product, which is creating a burden on the customer. So how to handle such elements is one of the important way which we have to look at. So the GST Council, the GST network, all these are playing a vital role in the implementation of these tax regime and this policy. So the companies and the entire entities in the supply chain also need to understand from time to time, and the customers also need to have an awareness on this. The distributors, retailers, every entity should have an awareness about these changes and these practices of tax slabs in the entire supply chain process, so that will help them to act accordingly, and they can alter their processes, alter their way of doing things, which will create or which will reduce the cost, and which will create value for the customers in a better way. And this will also ensure the efficiency and transparency, because the ultimate objective here is to look at enhancing the transparency and efficiency of the businesses. So let's see how it will create more impact, more efficiency, and more transparency in the business. But the ultimate supply chain process, every player in the supply chain need to have a overview of these aspects. They need to assess about all these changes, and they have to work out for a better product with a less value, with a less cost, and provides more value. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll discuss more aspects in the coming videos. Namaskar.